I want to play a little clip that went viral and then share my thoughts on it. It's a really interesting one from a really, really great engineer and friend of mine named Bob Horn. He is going to assert that the meters in Pro Tools actually affect the output path of what we're hearing.
I'll be like, yo, like, especially when you're talking about mid-range.
I can blow your mind with subtle stuff.
Say less. Uh-huh. Well, like, what you want to throw off? Like, randomly?
Some people think I'm crazy, but the ones that have heard it just freak out. The Pro Tools meters have a sound, and depending on which ones you choose, sound different.
Interesting.
So what meters do you use?
As far as just like my metering in general?
So like there's Pro Tools Classic, there's Linear Extended, there's a VU.
Oh, I think I'm not using a VU for sure. I forgot which one I'm using, but you're about to open my mind up to something.
Is it Pro Tools Classic?
I think it's the Classic. I think I'm using
the
Classic.
worst one.
From a sound standpoint, that's so interesting.
The meters, the code written for the meters must be in like a series to where they affect the audio.
Interesting.
And if you're summing, it gets recorded. Because obviously you're printing
I'm
back
going
in.
out. Whoa.
So if you're in the box, it's just how you're monitoring. But I always say your best monitoring will help you make the best decisions.
Sure. True.
But for those guys, it's not going to matter that much because they're in the box.
Right.
If you're summing, it matters.
Right.
And Pro Tools Classic sounds horrible.
Interesting. As far as how it's processing kind of for that display and stuff like that.
I guess so.
Something weird.
So the masters have a setting, and then tracks and auxes have a setting. Two different settings. So my ultimate combo that Pensado, me, and this tech from United Studios United Recording. He discovered it, and they told me about it. But it's linear extended on the masters and K14 on the tracks.
Okay.
And the look of it takes a minute to get used to.
Sure. Yeah.
But when you A/B that sound,
right, it's a different.
Just go home and do it.
I almost picked up my phone and started writing, and I realized it's a video. I can watch it back.
You're on the worst one.
I am. I'm on the worst one. That is crazy.
It made me angry.
Yeah, I'm probably gonna be super angry. Yeah. I'm probably gonna want to.
Okay, so let me explain what's going on here. First of all, hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com and Weiss Advice here on YouTube. So this is the assertion that in Pro Tools, if you change the metering on the tracks and the master fader, you are going to get a different sound in your output path. However, it's only in your output path, so it is not going to render if you are internally bouncing, but if you were to do some kind of a loop around, you would in fact get a different sound. So of course, I'm a pretty skeptical person. I wanted to investigate this, so the first thing that I did was just by ear. I pulled up a recent mix that I did, I checked my settings. My settings were neither of the ones that were suggested, neither Pro Tools Classic nor the K14 Linear Extended Combo. So I switched it over to Pro Tools Classic. I gave it a listen, sounded fine. I then switched it over to K14 and Linear Extended, and sure enough, I actually heard a pretty distinct difference, one where I didn't feel like I needed to null test anything to understand whether or not it was a difference, so this wasn't really subtle in my mind. And mind you, my expectation was that this was going to be nonsense, because this kind of stuff normally is nonsense. However, I heard something very distinct. I decided, let's do some null testing. The idea of a null test is to take two prints of sound and flip one out of phase and play them back simultaneously. If you hear something, that means the two sounds are in some way, shape, or form different, and if you hear nothing, in other words, you get a perfect null, then those two sounds are identical. So I sought to do this two ways. The first thing that I wanted to do was using a loop around, meaning coming out of my converters, specifically using the monitor path, and going right back into my converters, so printing the way Bob has suggested you would hear a difference. So when I tried this, what I found was that the Pro Tools Classic and the K14/Linear Extended combo did not null. However, when we do a test like this, we also have to do something called a control test. A control test is when you take something with the same settings, put it under the same condition, and see whether or not those null. So in other words, I did a second set of prints using the K14 and Linear Extended combo, and I simply printed it twice through my converters and back in. And guess what? Those didn't null either. So that test doesn't really prove anything, it only proves that when we're doing a loop around, we're going to get some kind of a difference in the sound. Okay, so I tried it another way. I thought, what would happen if I were to take the monitor path and export it internally in my computer to a different program, in this case using Telestream ScreenFlow. So ScreenFlow can record the outs of Pro Tools. When I did that, what I found was that, again, the two did not null. but that's because I found a mistake in my print. It turned out that I had left my dithering on, and dithering I left my dithering on for that one, and not for the loop around, but just for that one. And the dithering injects random noise. So when you have random noise, of course you're not going to get a null, and you're actually going to hear differences occur on the transients of the sound. So I then removed the dithering, I redid the test, and what I got was a perfect null. Now, I don't necessarily know the way these things are coded. I don't know if the internal bounce is somehow being picked up by ScreenFlow, or if it is in fact the way that I understand it, where it's actually taking the output path and recording it into ScreenFlow. If it's the former, it doesn't really say that what Bob is saying is wrong. If it's the latter, then Bob's wrong. However, what does that mean? Well, my ultimate conclusion is indeterminate. I'm not 100% sure, actually, whether or not the meters make a difference, but what am I going to do about it, right? This is, I think, the more relevant question. Given this information and given my testing, what am I going to do? Well, whenever these tests come up, I have a philosophy, which is whether or not it's placebo, go with my ears. There are people who will run tests who are more scientific with things and say you can't trust your ears and your psychology can fool you. However, the same logic applies when we're talking about scientific tests. If we don't know the exact formulation of everything involved, then we can't necessarily conduct a test scientifically enough to prove what we are trying to prove. And so, with a limited scope of our knowledge, scientific testing isn't necessarily so reliable either, because we are not reliable. We are not necessarily the scientists. So what's the conclusion here? What am I going to do? The bottom line is, when I switched over to K14 and linear extended, I personally heard a difference. Therefore, I am going to go with the one that I prefer, which was in fact what Bob is suggesting. Whether or not that's placebo, it doesn't really matter to me. That is what my ears are telling me, and that is what I am going to go with. And I suggest that to anyone else, because we will debate back and forth whether or not DAWs have a sound. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't, depending on the circumstances. Maybe it's something simple as pan laws or the way the defaults are set up. But whatever it is, if you hear a difference and you feel something is making your results better, go with that. It doesn't really matter whether or not it's correct or it's because of certain settings or whatever it might be. The bottom line is, sometimes art isn't perfect and we just have to go with how we feel, even if it's something as simple as, oh, it's just a level difference, or, oh, it's a bypass trim button that objectively is doing nothing, but for whatever reason we think it's doing something. Because sometimes weird things that don't make sense do happen in this world, and we just have to go with our gut, we have to go with our ear, we have to trust ourselves, and that is the way that art gets made. So, anyway, my conclusion, yep, I'm switching over. You could tell me I'm dumb or silly or into some mythology, but the fact is I heard a difference, I'm going with it. Anyway, if you dig this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. Before I wrap up here, by the way, I want to explain some things going on. You'll notice that all of my treatment is down, and that's a pretty new thing. That's because this is the very last video I am shooting here. I am packing up, moving to Miami, and the next video you see from me, well, the next video that I record fresh that you see from me is going to be from the Good Days, Miami, my commercial studio. It will be open at the end of March, early April. I will be keeping you posted on that. And yeah, I'm a little tired. I don't know if you can tell, but I am also incredibly excited. So the last thing that I say here on this channel is we are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.